Welcome back to Open Line. Tonight we are talking about inflation. I know it impacts you just as much as it's impacting my family as well. If you have questions about it, go ahead and give us a call. 615-737-PLUS is the number to call. Our guest tonight is an associate professor at Lipscomb University, Dr. Hannah Stolze. Thank you again for joining us tonight. We're talking a little bit about the labor shortage in our last segment and how that has impacted prices as well. I do want to talk about the demand that we saw even right before the pandemic for minimum wage to increase. It's been an ongoing fight for many years, but had really kind of reached a fever pitch before the pandemic. Now we're seeing a labor shortage. How will this continue to impact prices, even if we get supplies on store shelves?
Yeah, this is definitely going to be a huge determiner over whether inflation is a good or a bad thing. It's definitely going to hinge on what happens with wages. And so when we think about getting workers back into, we need truck drivers, we need warehouse workers, we need, fast food restaurant workers and people to stock grocery shelves. And I think seeing what happens with wage increases, there has been that kind of call to say minimum wage should be going up. And it's been interesting to watch over the last year. I don't know if you've paid attention, the stores that seem to have a lot of workers are the companies like the Trader Joe's and the Starbucks and the companies that have reputations for treating their employees really well. Like you go to Chick-fil-A and it seems like they have like 1,000 workers,
yes,
in the drive-through. And it's really created a competitive edge for companies who have raised wages and have treated their employees well that I hope will be a new normal in terms of wage increases, because if wages can increase slightly faster than inflation, it's not as bad a thing for our economy as it seems on the, when we look at the price tag at the checkout at the grocery store.
You don't think that will have a direct correlation to what companies then need to charge for their products because they're paying their workers more?
Yeah, there is going to be some correlation there, obviously, definitely. But it's not even comparable to the cost of stockouts and the cost of the bottlenecks that we've seen. So the fact that companies have been losing out on sales and maybe even losing customers if they haven't had the product in the store is a much bigger cost than raising the wages for your employees in a planned way over time. And actually raising wages, if your employees feel like they're more valued and it increases productivity, there can be efficiencies that come over time with it, that it's not all, it isn't going to always hit the bottom line as hard as companies think initially.
Yeah,
so certainly there could be some price increases as well. Yeah.
Let's talk about the interest rate is probably going to be raised very soon. How will that impact inflation?
Yeah, the goal with raising interest rates is that people slow down their spending, right? So it's harder to buy a new house or to buy a new car, if interest rates are higher. And we've been at really almost zero interest rates in some industries and really, really low interest rates in terms of buying. Like if you paid attention to the housing market in Nashville, it's hard to find a house,
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's definitely, so at a high inflation, it's definitely a seller's market, right? If you have something to sell, you paid yesterday's price for it and you sell it today at today's price, you're doing great. So the goal with interest rates is to make it a little bit harder to borrow, to make it a little bit harder, to slow down that demand so that the rest of the market can catch up. And so it's a tricky thing. It's really hard to get that right for the Fed. I'm definitely not an economist, but we can look back over history and see it times when it was done well and times when it didn't work out so well. So I think more than looking to the Fed and interest rates to fix this, I think really the more optimistic outlook is that COVID slows, that we don't have any more, kind of COVID outbursts, and that our ports catch up, our infrastructure catch up. We can have product flow, and that will actually slow inflation organically, which is healthier, I think, for the economy.
I want to take a bit of a turn here and talk really about your expertise, which is supply chain management. And again, that's a term that has really just become part of our vernacular over the past year and a half. What have companies learned through the last 2 years that they need to do differently to be prepared for another pandemic or whatever the next thing is, so we don't end up in the same scenario again?
Yeah, this is a really great question that I think, as supply chain professors, we're getting asked a lot. Like, what did we learn from this? Is lean really a thing? And so when you think about the perfect supply chain, right? If you're Walmart or Starbucks, and you have the perfect supply chain, you are able to 100% accurately forecast what demand will be. So how many people are going to come and buy a coffee every day? And if you can kind of, forecast that perfectly, then you can know that you can get the perfect amount of coffee to meet that demand. So the perfect supply chain meets supply, meets demand with the perfect amount of supply. So we know that broke in 2020. Demand went up, supply went down, the world was at odds. And so what supply chains learned, over the last 20 years, we've had a really healthy economy. It's been, we've had consistent infrastructure. We've had consistent growing flow of goods, right, from China. We heard a lot about that over the past few years into the US. And companies had really gone uber efficient in matching that demand and supply. So especially in industries that were reliant on computer chips or, certain areas of Chinese manufacturing, if they didn't have excess inventory, if they didn't have safety stock, when demand went up in mid 2020, and then we had all these bottlenecks, they could not get enough product into the marketplace. So I would say that what we learned is in your risk assessment, add global pandemics. That's a thing now that we should be planning for. And if we have a global pandemic, now it's way more likely than we would have said, 5-10 years ago. We now realize the impact of that is enough that companies should analyze how much extra product they carry differently than what we would have said 10 years ago. So maybe you need a little more inventory than we thought in the past. And maybe we need to have more suppliers that are spread out around the world so that we're not just dependent on Southern California for our ports and to get product into this country. So I think we've seen a lot of really good lessons that we've learned about our global supply chain and global sourcing in the last 2 years.
Let's jump back to the phone lines. We have Tom on the line. Tom, good evening to you. Go ahead.
Hello. Whoop, got to clear my throat. How you doing?
Good.
I'm 75 years old. I've been around for a while. He had a caller call in and said this administration could have done more. You know what? That who remembers Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the Supreme Court? She said the president is not a king. I mean, what more could they do? For 40 years, is every president responsible every time there's inflation? I don't think so. Now I forgot what I was going to say, but anyway, it's the feds that are raising the interest rate. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Can't think what
yes.
That is correct.
Yes.
Biden doesn't have anything to do with that, does he? Or does he?
Well, I mean, he definitely appoints people that are in the Fed, but they will make decisions, that he may or may not agree with, for sure.
Yeah. For sure. Tom, did you have anything else to add? All right, Tom, thank you for calling in tonight. I think we lost you tonight, but thank you, Tom, for calling in. And I think that, I think Tom's question is so valid. And I think that's where a lot of us sit. We think, this is not my expertise. I don't teach this for a living. I don't dive into the markets every day for a living. And so we think, gosh, it's costing me so much now to buy laundry detergent and produce and meat at the grocery store. And I just, I think, well, what's the deal? Why is this such a problem? And that's where people just get frustrated and throw their hands up and want to point the blame somewhere. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. We do want to have somebody to blame for it all, especially when it affects our wallet, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's go back to the phones. We have Lisa on the line. Hi, Lisa.
Hi.
Go ahead.
So I think I heard most of what your last caller said, and he brought up the Fed raising the interest rates.
Right.
Maybe he's not aware the Fed is doing that in an attempt to stamp down inflation a bit. Mm-hmm. So, that's not the problem with inflation. They're trying to tamp it down by raising the rates.
That's right.
And as far as Joe Biden and this illegitimate, corrupt administration, yes, he has had a lot to do with the inflation a lot. And if we see a change in this, it's not going to happen soon. I mean, you ladies are acting like this was all a surprise and making predictions about when it's going to change and how it's going to change. But I don't know about you two necessarily, but the economists and people up till now that have spoken about it say, oh, it came out of nowhere. How is that so? I mean, you both should know that a big part of this is the incredible amount of spending that has happened and the printing of money by our government in the last 2 years. Incredible amount. And we would be sinking much quicker if that other bill had gotten passed that the Biden administration wanted to push through. The infrastructure bill is a catastrophe. So little of that is based on infrastructure. So it's a mess, and hopefully we can see some of it change for the better before this administration moves on out. But we may not until Trump comes back.
All right, Lisa, thank you for your call. And just so you know, I want to point back to the beginning of the show. Dr. Stolze, you did mention that there are several factors pouring into what is happening. One being COVID, two being all the stimulus checks. So you did mention that. But it's several things that are happening here. It's not just pointing at one.
Yeah. And it's been a lot of things, exactly like you said, economists, act surprised and nobody really knows exactly, it's the perfect storm. So what is the driver of it all? We don't really know. And so it's messy, it's challenging, but we do know that it is an economic cycle that we have seen over time. And so it'll be interesting to see whether, companies kind of pull us out, whether it's COVID, whether, maybe it'll be legislation. I don't know, but there isn't like I'd be working for the Fed if I had the tried and true solution for all of it, right?
Wait, you don't have a crystal ball underneath that desk?
Not tonight, no.
All right, we're going to take another quick break. When we come back, I'd love to have more of your questions. So go ahead and give us a call, 615-737-PLUS. We'll be right back.